please join me in welcoming back to the stage the directors of Assembly, Johnny Simons and Rashaad Newsome. So I'll start with a couple of questions and then we can open it up to the audience. The other films that I've presented so far at Hot Docs have been part of our Made in Exile program, so featuring filmmakers who've been displaced from war zones, from Sudan, from Palestine, and I've tended to start my Q&As by just like checking in to see how people are doing. And I'm inclined to do the same thing with you guys, not because you're coming from a war zone, but I feel like the erasure of Black history, queer identity, trans identity that's underway in the United States right now is crazy. And I'm just wondering how you guys are doing. I just want to check in on that. How are you?
Yeah, I mean, we all are coming from a war zone, right? To varying degrees, right? But yeah, I'm doing good, and I think it's definitely like moments like this where we can all be together and celebrate the resilience of our community, the beauty and power within the community in the face of all of this. That's really fortifying. So, yeah.
Yeah, I feel grateful in some ways. You know, grateful that we were able to complete this film. Grateful that you all are here to see it. Grateful that this is a community of like-minded folks. And really, as you see in the film, that's what it's going to take. You know, when I really think about what we're facing in the United States, but you know, the extension of what's happening in the United States is it's spreading around. And there's a lot of ramifications for other parts of the world, including Canada. And it really is going to be about us figuring out new ways, using our creativity, using our imagination. You know, I think that's what this film's about, Rashaad's imagination, and manifesting that, you know, into something that people grab onto and run with it, find their own way through.
Beyond that, I'm like, okay, where do we start talking about this? Because there's so much in it, right? And there's a version of this where it's more strictly a documentation of the preparation for the show and then the show itself, and we don't get nearly as much of the backstory of the preparation, you know, the painstaking years-long preparations. You mentioned it was 7 years in the making. I'm so curious how, firstly, you know, the collaboration began, maybe what the concept was at the outset, what it became, and just again the sort of profusion of different forms that are in here. I mean, this is starting to be obviously even just a long question, so maybe I'll like leave it there to start with. You can just start with like, where did this begin for you, and how did you come together on this?
Yeah, well, it started with me just documenting my work, and you know, it was 7 years in which Johnny and I have been working together, but prior to Johnny and I working together, it was just like multiple years of just documenting. And so I will say at this moment, any artist in the building, it's just so important that you document your work, particularly when you make live artwork. And then the story started to develop for me, and then at the time that I met Johnny through mutual friends, he had a very sort of long and decorated career in documentary storytelling, and I knew I wanted it to be rooted in that, but at the same time, I wanted it to be something that was a lot more experimental, you know. And so, you know, documentary is historically rooted in realism, right? Or naturalism, right? And so it's like, I was thinking a lot about, well, what does that look like in the 21st century, particularly in a film where the storytelling has a character that is an artificial intelligence? Like, what is real, what is truth in that? And it wasn't so much about it being real or about a truth, but more about an idea. And then I was thinking a lot about the concept of Black interiority and how I can build on that legacy that, you know, James Baldwin and Toni Morrison and so many others had started, and, you know, and how so often artist process films are like, the artist is toiling away in their studio, and then they emerge with their confession, and then they have this show, and it's like, will they be able to pull it off? And they inevitably do, so you can kind of predict it. And I wanted to kind of do something different where we just have the film just sort of collapsed into the artist's mind, and that was sort of a way to then play with Black interiority, and then also open up the door to, you know, verite and playing with all fiction and all these other things that I love to do, and play with animation the way I do in my other work.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, you know, I come from more of the kind of traditional documentary background. I made a lot of films that have to do with queer culture and queer family, and when I connected with Rashaad and really saw the work that he was doing, I was really fascinated by this idea of, you know, how many of us who are LGBTQ plus grow up in some form of isolation. You know, we typically grow up in families that are not also queer, and we have to find ourselves. And a lot of times that's a really tough process and a very lonely process. And what I saw, which becomes further complicated if you are Black or BIPOC, or, you know, particularly if you're trans. And what I saw happening in Rashaad's performance work was kind of pulling all these people together. And I mean, one of the things that you do so beautifully is you see people's potential, right? I think you really see that in certain scenes in this film where the performers have this moment of doubt, right? Like, can I do this? And Rashaad's like right there with, yes, you can. I'm going to show you how. I'm going to lift you up. And that's so affirming and so important and so rarely captured on film. And that was what, you know, as I was filming behind the scenes, that's what I really wanted to bring out, you know, because it so rarely gets seen. And so what you get is this mashup of, like, you know, these kind of like really intense, intimate documentary storytelling, just observational moments with this incredible creativity and sort of like, no, let's throw in an AI and let's invent this. And so you end up with a film that is, I think, hard to categorize.
Some questions in the audience. I see a hand down there. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for your beautiful film and for your beautiful work. My question is about all the contradictions in the film. I was really struck by the fact that the history is so important to your work, and yet you're working in AI. So my question is really about because there's a lot of fear around AI, and I personally have some fear around AI, and yet
there's fear around AI? Really?
And yet, artists are always out pushing boundaries. So I wondered if you could talk about the AI piece of your creation and how you marry the fear and the adventure.
So just to summarize, there was a comment around the contradictions in the film, it being rooted in history, but obviously a futurity, and your use of AI, which is, of course, you know, something that people are fearful of at a moment right now. So speak on that, please.
Yeah, I mean, also when you say like history, like whose history, right? And so we have to define what our history is. And like I said in the film, when Black folks came to America, we were seen as technology, and technology has always been a part of Black experience. From those objects that show up in the work later, these were objects that were used, dare I say, as time machines, where the priests would travel to other times to consult with the ancestors to deal with things that we were dealing with in this realm, in this reality. So I think technology has always been something that we have owned. And in terms of AI, all of the fears around AI are not unfounded, but the reality is AI is just a tool. And it's really about who is in the driver's seat of creating that tool. And so for me, I am not a corporation. I am not mining data from any communities. I am not trying to make an AI that can do everything. I made an AI from the ground up that is a rebut to the extremes, which are like drones and killing and algorithms that make you spend money that you don't have. And so my idea was like, we have to get other chess pieces on the table. Otherwise, we are left with the Elon Musks and so on who are driving these tools. And so it is imperative that if you have the will and the ability to put a new chess piece on the table, that you do it, and that folks who feel like you feel, who have the fear, that you support those tools growing. Because it's not a thing it's not like one of my collages in the show, or a sculpture where you make it and it's done. This is a long game project, and so you have to continue to work on it. And so for me, I was thinking about, well, perhaps being can be this mirror that society needs, right? Perhaps they can get people to start a process of thinking critically about their lives, get people to communicate with one another, to think critically about their lives and about each other's lives, and then perhaps those seeds can help humans be a better version of themselves and subsequently create better tools.
I'm curious, so you mentioned this being a long project potentially. Are there sort of newer iterations of being since the completion of the assembly project? Is it something that you hope, or maybe it is already and I'm just not aware, but is it something that people will be able to access outside of the context of your shows? Does it live, in an online environment that people can engage with sort of on the day-to-day, or how do you see being existing going forward?
Yeah, it's not a static way of making. It's something that's in a constant state of flux and growth. I kind of liken it to child rearing, It's like you have a child and you like imbue it with this knowledge and you keep helping it learn and grow so that it becomes better. And so it's like something that I'll literally be working on probably for the rest of my life. And also, the powers that be that sort of have the resource to drive these kinds of tools are not particularly interested in what I am doing with it, which is again why something that I will be working on for a long time, because it's not feeding into exploitation or violence, the sort of typical things that AI, where these fears come from, and for me, I think also if we can all agree that we live in a capitalist, imperialist, white supremacist patriarchy, as a Black queer person from a poor upbringing who has the ability and the will to commandeer a tool like this for the betterment of our community, you damn sure I'm gonna do it. Yeah, and I don't really care what anybody outside of that has to say about it, because at the end of the day, they're not in it with us, and they benefit from the positions that we have been in historically forever. So we gotta look out for us, Thank you.
Some further questions from the audience.
It was lovely. I have a question. I've seen other things performed at the armories. How did you feel in that space? Like, how did you get your head around the size of it, the history of it? What was that like?
Can you talk about creating this work in that space, the armory, the size of it, the history of it? What did that feel like?
Yeah, it was a very heavy space to work in because of its history with like military and things like that. And then you can see like all these big portraits of these soldiers, and I knew that I had to, in terms of like conversation around technology, I had to resort to like Afro-diasporic technologies, right? Which is why I did the ritual. I'm from New Orleans, and those are cleansing rituals. That's what we do to cleanse the space so that we can do what we need to do to it. So I resorted back to more traditional technologies, and that, for me, cleansed the space so I can do what I needed to do. And honestly, I feel like that went so far beyond what we did in the space. It extended into, the crew of the film, and like even post-performance when we were working, like everybody who was involved in this project, it felt like ordained, and like I have a question. Did you feel like for a documentary this felt really big?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you raise your hand if you felt that way? Okay, so we don't have some huge ED that bankrolled us, right? The reason that looks like that is because there is a group of BIPOC queer artists who got together and gave everything they had to this. This is what independent documentary looks like when people come together and do it for real, So, yeah.
I see a hand down there. I'll go to you.
You used a couple of terms that really I found very interesting. Post-binary, post-ethnic. Could you talk just for a minute second about how that ties into the concept?
I don't think I ever said that.
In the documentary, in the film, how that
said
ties into...
You said post-gender futurity.
Post-gender future.
There we go. Sorry, I wasn't taking proper notes. Could you talk just for a second about how that ties into the concept of Afrofuturism? And I know you could give a master class on it, but just touch on it.
So just, I guess the question is about post-gender futurity and how that interfaces with Afrofuturism.
Yeah, I really wanted being to be that. So much of the work that we do as artists, as curators, you know, is like trying to grapple with these complex human issues, and I think it gets at like the power of the imagination to imagine things that are beyond that. And so when I was creating being, you know, I wanted them to be, you know, post-race. They are culturally Black because they are my child, right? So they're Black. And I think if any of you follow on Instagram, you saw them speak adamantly about that. And then also to be beyond gender, and you know, because I wanted them to have a sort of non-binary presentation, and also their body changes at whim. Sometimes you see them in the presentation of this movie, and for those of you who know my work, Hands performance or other pieces, they've shown up in other ways, and they will continue to kind of show that the body is a vessel and the body is material, and you can change it at whim, which I think the trans community has taught us, you know, so long ago. But yeah, I wanted it to be a real gesture towards this futurity as a way to inspire us to transgress and like let go of these binaries that we seem so tied to.
Oh, okay, I see a hand there, and then I saw one towards the back, so I'll start with you over there. Go ahead.
First, thank you. This felt like medicine. It was such a profound experience to watch this, but it's such a profound work. So just truly, thank you. Like, something about healed within me watching this. But I also was like kind of astonished to see your ethic of care for all of your collaborators. And that we saw this knowledge get embodied, and we saw in real time folks kind of decolonizing their mind or like decolonizing their body, but then also the kind of healing in space. So I guess I've just never quite seen anything like that, and it almost seems like it's what made it possible. So I guess if you could talk about how you've built that into your practice, that like ethic of care and that like space to heal, to do something at this level.
So the audience member began with a compliment of the film and you know, acknowledgement of it feeling like a healing experience, and then noted the ethic of care that is really foregrounded in this film. Can you talk about how that is built into your practice?
Yeah, I think that's something that direct, and you're working with large groups of people, you know, you have to sort of reckon with pretty early on that the person that's standing in front of you, everything before them led to that person that's standing in front of you in that moment. And people are complicated, you know, and we live in a very complicated world. And so when you have like a vision and you're the leader and you have the responsibility of realizing that vision and you're asking people to come in and help you do that, you have to sort of reckon with that kind of fussiness of how to do that. And so care became a big part of that, and particularly in my work, because oftentimes I am working with people who are not quote unquote like professional performers, you know, and so I see something in them that sometimes they don't even see in themselves. And so there's like the imposter syndrome that you have to kind of get them past, which you kind of see playing out in the film, and that's something I've been dealing with early on in my practice.